you have questions about my work, which, I reverse paint with vitreous enamels on glass. So a lot of people don't know really what that means, but it's like the way stained glass windows are done, but I'm doing it in a way that it's not put in a window with light coming through it, but instead building up many more layers of color in a kiln, multiple firings to make pieces that are opaque and that I can then use sculpturally. Or as what I'm starting to do now is what I'm calling inclusions in, I call it paintings with glass inclusions. Because I'm just looking, I originally started out doing a lot of sandblasting and engraving, and that was wonderful, but I really was looking for a way to have more color and have things be less light dependent, because when you have something that's sandblasted or engraved, it really is dependent on how it's lit, or you really can't see it. So as I moved in, probably around 1993 maybe, I started really painting on glass and exploring the mosaic possibilities, because when you fire the enamels on, you can actually then go and cut your glass into smaller pieces, and that way I can mosaic. So if I want to do a sculptural piece, I can, cover the surface and build the skin. And alternatively, I can do a whole painting and mount it on a piece, or further down on the wall, you can see actual paintings with imagery. So over the last probably 10, 12 years, I've done a lot of boats that have painted glass sails. Before that, the sails were engraved and sandblasted. So if you go back and look at my work, you'll see a transition from that type of piece to bigger mosaic pieces with the painted sails. So they'll be painted on both sides. But what I wanted to show you was that what I do is I actually start usually by putting on the black enamel first, and then building up the color from that. And sometimes I actually use my linoleum blocks. I have linoleum blocks I've made over the years, and I just print them on anything. So I figured out a way to print on the glass with the linoleum blocks, and you see it's like, because it's floppy, it's easy. And I do, when we're all done, you can come back and pick these up and look at them, because it'll give you a little bit better idea of what the small pieces of glass are like. So and I do all the cutting with a glass cutter, and then nippers if I'm going actually smaller. Because some of the pieces on this, the Mean Queen, are like a 1/16 of an inch. So now I'm talking all just tech talk. So now I'm going to let you ask questions, because I'm pretty sure I'm not covering things you actually really want to know.
It looks like a lot of your pieces have leaves on the background.
Right, and so a lot of times I'll finish with a gold leaf on the back of the glass to make it more luminescent. You can tell I like the glittery thing. So these pieces that are really new, these were breakthrough pieces I did specifically for this show, where I really was building up. They have torn linen, which then I would paint and then mount the glass on it to have a very jewel-like effect. I'm going for really a sort of Byzantine feel. So they're actually bezeled into place with many, many, many layers of paint. And for me, they're very much like mandalas. They have little bits of mirror, but the thing about them, and when you're talking about light, is that in any light, they actually show up. So I noticed last night that when the lights came off, these actually showed up almost better in a way. And so they catch anything that's going in front of them, any kind of, movement. So that it's like they're always moving, they're always capturing a little piece of the space. And I've become really interested in that idea of how a piece affects a space, or affects you as you pass by it, or how it spiritually affects you. So these are a big deal for me. I mean, they're small, but they're actually, if I hadn't had this show, I probably wouldn't have discovered these. Because, I don't know, a lot of times, like when I made this piece, I actually was, I made it to submit for a competition in Japan, and the criteria was to make something that was mostly glass. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to work. That's the thing I want to make, and that I think would be really spectacular to send to Japan, because I think they'd actually really enjoy it. But I can't do it because it has to be more glass. And so I spent 3 months covering this thing in little tiny pieces of glass, but then it didn't get into competition anyway. So here it is. And you're the guys that lucked out. So I love doing this. I mean, I love the Moon Queen, and I'm just going to, because you can't see the back of her, I'm going to show you the back. Because for me, this was very much, I mean, the front of her has her personality, but the back is the sculptural painting. And there's part of me that wants to be really detailed and specific, and there's part of me that just wants to bust loose and be messy and be more abstract. So all of these kind of have both qualities, because I'm always kind of trying to go both ways. It's like,
How much of this do you plan out ahead of time, and how much develops as you proceed?
So that's a good question, because people ask that, especially about the pieces with the drawings and the paintings on them where there's imagery. And it used to be I was much tighter about that. I would draw it on paper first, and because you could put the glass on top of it and see your drawing through it, then I could follow it. And a lot of that work that I do with the black first, typically actually with these, and you can that's kind of where I bring these, there's a lot of black that remains on this. So I actually cover the whole thing in black, and then I start taking away. And if I put it on with a brush or a palette knife, all of those things leave marks that are specific to the tool that I put it on with. So when I remove material, like with a paper towel or something, those thicker areas remain there. And now I'm more likely to see something in the remaining marks that is inspirational to me to go ahead and make the drawing. And so I'm working with quill pens, I'm working with liner brushes, and then I do a lot of sgraffito, because I might paint a big line and then decide I want to go back and refine it, so I'll scratch them. So I do a lot of reduction to get to the final image that's in black, which I fire, and then from there I start building up the colors, and that's probably another 3 firings. So if I'm doing transparent colors, like in, pretty sure, yeah, when you look at this again, you'll see that there are certain, the thing with the enamels is that it's the only paint that has really transparent colors. So you know that from stained glass windows. But so I use that in a way so that if I'm foiling from the back, I actually get that luminescence, which I can only do if I am firing on the enamel. That answer.
Well, and the big piece on the table,
Yes.
was that planned out before you started working on it?
I drew on it with pencil, and so then I would like outline, and I don't usually actually mosaic like this. This was a little bit of a breakthrough way also, because a lot of times if I'm doing a boat, I might have a stripe down the center, but I'm never actually this intricate. And so I actually I outlined with these forms that I drawn with pencil, and then I had to fit everything to go back inside of it. And used more dichroic glass probably than I've ever used on a piece, because it's really expensive. But it was a kind of another discovery, because even if you think of that as kind of a sewing line or an embroidery line, it has a function where it really shows up, it borders the other colors, which then can be much more mixed in between. So I can actually have a pattern and yet have it be, I would call these areas where there's a lot of colors in there more painterly, just because they're more pixelated, I guess.
I'm architect.
Huh?
That was another thing.
No, you go ahead.
You might have said this already, but you stick it on. I mean, how do they adhere on the little
So I have different glues for doing different things. On this, I have a particular glue that I finally have gone to a water-based glue, or even an adhesive that's used for bathroom tiles. So I like now to use something that's water-based. For a long time I was using on epoxy, which was like not only unhealthy, but it just wasn't the best choice. So now I reverted to this a water-based technique. So I glue everything on, and I'll choose an area because depending on how fast the glue dries, I'm usually just doing a small area, and I get that done, and then I move on to the next area. And so it's like a building out, partially according to how fast the glue is going to dry, but also there's so much fitting in there that I'm having to like clip and figure out how it's gonna fit.
And then it's so smooth, but you couldn't sand it, right? Because then you take off.
Yeah, so this is the only piece I've ever done like this where I took every single piece of this glass and I took all the sharp edges off of it before I put it on, which was really insane.
But it does feel amazing.
But I have a little pin on where I actually had mosaicked it and then put it on a wet dry belt sand and polished it all down. So it just kind of depends on the finish that you want on a piece. On some pieces, especially if they're a little bit further apart, you've got a little bit bigger grout line, it's not really going to matter that you didn't put the edge on it. I mean, it kind of dulls it while you're putting the grout on, so it's not going to cut you. But it definitely doesn't have the smooth feeling that this has. Because I couldn't wrap around that edge unless I did that. Yes.
You know, I know acrylic paint, but how do you get enamel paint?
The enamels are made, the ones I use, I think used to be made in Germany. I'm not sure. The Rouchet is the enamel I use. So it's a ground glass that's a leaded glass, so it'll melt at a lower temperature. And then it has minerals in it to be the pigments. And then there's only one company here that I know of that sells them. I mean, I think there's some others in Europe perhaps, but it's not that readily available. And it's a whole technique of, knowing how to put it on, putting it through the kiln. And sometimes I teach it. But it isn't just a regular paint. Yeah, it's done in a kiln. It's a melting of a thin layer of glass onto the glass.
How do you go about cutting through the glass?
I have a glass cutter. I use it's a Toyo oil-fed glass cutter. It has a small wheel in it that's oil-fed, carbide wheel. And so it's a pretty nice cutter. And so I can cut, most of this glass I usually cut to about a 1/2 inch like that. And if I want it smaller than that, then I use a different type of clipper that just breaks it.
You go sections at a time?
Yeah. I mean, I have little containers where I have, like if I have when I do a big sheet of glass, I usually fire a 20 by 20 piece of glass with whatever I know I'm going to cut up the imagery on it, or maybe, that's why I put these out, as some of these are much looser. I might just paint on it and do a couple of firings to build up color. But some of them I'll actually spend like a whole week or more drawing, very specific zigzags or something like that. But that big sheet then gets cut up into these 1/2 inch pieces. And from there, if I need it smaller, I figure out how to get it smaller.
So I have a question. It's such a layperson question. I mean, you paint the back black first,
Yes.
and then you scrape away the black, like where the green is, for instance. You scrape all of that away. The black away. And then put on the green.
So you can see, for example, on the line around his head.
Yes. The black.
Okay, that was one big brush mark. And so I used a brush to paint that line. And then when I wiped away, it left the heavier areas on either side of the line, but it took away the middle.
Oh, so you don't paint black on the whole sheet of
I
glass?
do.
Oh, you do?
And it left, but I take away a lot of it.
Yes.
So I'm only leaving it in certain areas where I know I'm gonna want it. So that might be areas that are shaded.
Yes.
Or where on him, and in some ways there was less shading, but I was more interested in this double line.
So you wiped away all where the green is, and then put in green.
Yes.
Yes.
And you can see where I left a little bit of black in there just for smudges. So he's got a dirty face. I think there was more questions back here.
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I will reduce it down. The technical question was, some of the tile are very luminescent. Are those also backed with metal, of the ones on your sculpture?
Yes. So they would all be backed with gold leaf of some kind. Some of this is actually a bullseye glass, and some of it actually is enameled. But it being like this transparent ruby red, then all I had to do really on it to make it luminescent was to gold leaf it. So on this figure, for example, that's up this thing here. instead of the gold leaf, I use gold glitter. So the Mylar glitter is actually fabulous because it lays down, it's almost like it's little fish scales. So it just lays down in almost like little pattern, and at the same time, so you can see it glitters more
Yeah.
where the light is. It's from a distance across the room, it's just gonna totally ping.
And are you doing that after you cut the tiles or prior to your cutting? And when it's on the sheet?
On this painting, I did the whole painting first, and it's the very last thing I do. So I already know where I want it to be luminescent. But on the tiles, I'll have done my multiple firings, and then the last thing I do is put on the gold. So it's only going to come true wherever there's a transparent color. So I'm going to let you pass this around. It's got a little bit sharp edges, so don't.
And then Keke, at what point in your life did you know that this was your path?
So I think from the time I don't remember any time in my life where I didn't think I was going to be an artist. That was the only avenue I had chosen for myself, whatever. It was the only thing I was interested in. So I was always drawing, mostly pen and ink. And when I ended up in Santa Fe and I had a job, I was working in a Native American gallery. I discovered a book on the Mimbres Indian pottery. And I just loved the very simplicity of all the black and white drawings on the pottery. And thinking about it now, I'm actually like, and it was on a three-dimensional surface. So that may have actually had more impact than I even realized at the time. But I started doing renditions of contemporary life in Santa Fe, but in that style. So my laundromat, first cafeteria, and the gallery where I was working loved them and gave me a show, my first show. And some people came in, Jim and Linda Siebert. He was an architect, and they had just built this fabulous house. And they had glass kitchen cabinets, and they said, if you can figure out how to get your drawings onto these glass cabinets, we'll give you a commission. So I found out about acid paste, which is just something that you can paint on, and frisket. And the frisket being, like a contact paper where you do your drawing and you cut it with an X-Acto knife, and then you lift off the areas that you want to etch. And that eventually led to my discovering that you could also sandblast, and that from there you could also sandblast deeply, and you could carve, and you can do so. And I worked for another glass blower, Peter Vanderlyn and Mary Beth Bliss. He was the blower and she was the etcher, and so she was doing these sort of more intricate, they were geese and creeps and things, but it had that sand carving technique. So I learned more about that technique working for them, and then kind of went on from there. But it was always more, even now with the glass, it's like, I just want to keep pushing it as far as I can. It's like, well, what else can I do with it? Well, what else can I make it do? Because the glass itself is fascinating. In a way, when they first said, put something on glass, I'm like, I never thought about glass as an artistic material. I think about it as a jam jar that, it breaks, you put it in the trash, whatever. It's like, it wasn't really that important to me. So, of course, over the years, and because of Phil Chuck and because of the glass movement, it's been much more interesting to follow all the different things that everybody's doing. And it's like we're an amoeba. We're like a force just discovering right and left different things for each person. And because at Phil Chuck, that's where the information gets shared. And so, it's kind of like being a scientist, only you get to play more. Yes.
So I have two questions. One is on your card, some of your work has mirror.
Excuse
There's
me?
mirror involved.
Oh, yes.
In some of your work. And then the other thing is, and I didn't know where that was. And then the other thing is, this piece is so smooth on the top. So you would have insulated it with a glossy clear enamel then? The one with glitter.
Oh, this piece? Oh, yeah. So so the rest of it is painted. So how I build these, I actually start with like a pink insulation foam for building houses. So that's my first part of my form. Then I wrap it in fiberglass tape, and then I build it up in mortar. So I call that my thin shell concrete. And so I'm building up, and so I've got this little thing too that I can pass around. So this is like how the basket is made. So there's more fabric in that, but it is basically the same technique. So I can make something more meaty like this, or I can work thin, because it's still really strong.
Right.
And then, yeah, so that's when I get to do more painting without firing it. And yes, it has like a varnish, just a water-based varnish on it.
On the top of the glass piece as well?
No, oh no, no glasses. No, because all the painting's on the back side. It's all reversed. Everything I do is on the back side of the glass. So it's all coming through. And the reason I think I'm addicted to it is because the colors remain so vibrant. It's like there's that much, there's like an 1/8 inch of varnish over the paint. But if that were a painting with that much varnish, what you would really notice is that how the surface is kind of, it's not never this smooth. But you put that varnish on not only to protect the paint, but to build up the glow of the paint. But I arrived there by painting on the back of the glass. And so it's kind of like how I think about it is like, you know, you find a rock in a river and it's beautiful and then it dries out and you're going, why did I pick this up? It's kind of like that. It's like these colors will always be like they were wet right out of the tube. They will never be as brilliant as when they're on the back side of the glass. Even if you're working in oil paint or something else, it's always going to have a, because there's no surface there to break it up. And what happens is that because this is glass, the light comes in and refracts and bounces back out, so it's actually carrying all that information to you in a bounce. I mean, it's fascinating, really.
What's the inspiration for the back, the bands of what looks like Aboriginal design around the back? I mean, it could be. That's one of the things.
Well, no, I mean, and so people think that I'm trying to do something maybe more Aboriginal, but what it really is I really like pattern, and so I'm really attracted to textiles, and so I would say the textiles are the biggest influence on me, and after that it's like everything that's like made out of gold, or you know, things that are ancient that are beautifully crafted, or old Celtic things that are all beat up. I mean, so I lived in Europe for 10 years, and so saturated between the mythology but also the architecture. So anything that was just old and has that history to it is something I'm actually trying to build into the pieces. That kind of mystery of like, well, where have you been? Tell me your story. But then the story, you, the audience, get to develop that story. So that's kind of hopefully my gift to you. You got everybody? Everybody get their questions answered?
And there'll be more chance for questions at the end.
Yes. Yeah, after, and you can handle things here if you want to look at these little pieces of glass that I'm going to leave here.
Okay, so one last question is,
Yeah.
Having looked at your work before, it's your fantastical creatures that are the most magical to me. And so what mythology,
I think I'm just trying to build character into them, and I want them to have this sense of humor, but also maybe just that sort of human fragility. I mean, the things, and it also, a lot of the figures that have the panels, it's all about like, we dress one way to appear one way, but inside we're actually another way. Maybe we're sort of covering that up. So in a way, it's kind of like, it's the duality of how we live and present ourselves, and you know, exposing maybe the frailty or the inner dreams or the desires. I try to, in some way, make them as human as possible without making them actually human. to let them have all the emotions that we can relate to, perhaps.
Keke, thank you. That was wonderful. Right now I think I'm Keke because I've got her all over. Get rid of that. Because I think I'm thinking that because, you know, the processes have so much similarity in what we do. And I gave a talk recently about process, because you are just looking at these pieces as they're brand new, but what you don't see are the years of time that you start on a path and you start developing ideas, and how one idea and also technique with the material kind of naturally leads you to the next, and then leads you to the next. And so you're on this path and you drop in the middle of it, and it looks maybe incredible or whatever. But for me, it's very much a momentary experience of where I am right now. So in reflecting about Keke too, she talked a lot about the reverse painting on glass, which I've always been fascinated with. And I do have one piece here that employs a little bit of that idea, and that's the hand that's up front. And you're not seeing it now, but it's about 30 inches tall, and it's a blown hand, very large hand. And the inside I've fired on, it's actually real gold luster on the inside. And then the painting happens on the outside of the piece. And so again, just like Keke talked about how the light can move in and bounce off of the solid metallic background and then move the light back to you, that has been employed in all kinds of ways throughout glass history. In Italy, you see it with in the canes that you might see in an Italian Latticino piece. It might be white. The cane might look blue, but really what it is it's white with transparent blue over it. And the white is opaque. And because of that, the light moves through and bounces and gives a certain brilliance that you don't see if you just use a blue opaque glass, right? It's a different kind of brilliance. Anyway, so all these things kind of play in when you start working with material. And when I originally started working with glass, I was 19. I had come from a clay background, and they're like really good cousins. Clay, metal, and glass, they're a little family unit, I like to think of them. And so I was working with low fire clay and low fire enamels, which are called china paints when you work with clay. But it's essentially glaze, right? It's silica mixed with a flux and then metal oxides to create the colors. And I was working with Ron Nagel, who is really well known with low fire ceramics. And then I got introduced because I was going to Laney College in Oakland, California, and my professor is Nancy Sullivan, who's a really well known, she works also with low fire or now mid fire clay. And she introduced me to Richard Marquis's work. And she shared a studio actually with Dick at the time in Oakland. And Dick took me on as his apprentice. And so I started blowing glass like that, doing pretty much the grunt work. I was the lowest on the totem pole. And blowing glass for 16 years kind of led me into doing this, which is much more like the ceramics that I was doing prior to working with Dick. And for me, the work is really about the story I want to tell. And the story isn't always known to me in the beginning, but often like a dream, you remember it and you create it, and later you reflect back on it, and it has a little bit more information. So the work is insightful for me to make for myself. And my goal is not so much to tell my story,
but to draw the stories out in everyone, because I think you look, as humans, we look at a piece and we automatically create a narrative that's around what you see. And the narrative varies somewhat, but what's incredible is how you can use an image and extract a similar narrative out of almost everyone. And I found that to be really true with what I make. Not all the work is narrative to tell a story. Sometimes I'm just fascinated with a shape or a plant or an image, and I think, or I imagine that a certain piece like the artichoke piece, what it would look like on a beautiful table, and to have illumination of candles inside the cups, and that it would bring more enjoyment and light to a certain situation. So it's not always kind of the story. And this is, it's hard when you start working with glass. It's hard to deal with it because the substance in and of itself is so seductive, and you can really use that a lot as an idea to pull people into it. So I'm often always in conversation with the glass where I'm saying, you know, you're really seductive like this, but you can lose a story very easily by simply looking at the color or the shininess, especially, is just really often too brilliant for people to look beyond. And so I started sandblasting the glass. So this piece, for instance, all of this has been sandblasted, including the bird. And then because I braid the surface with the sandblaster, I'm able to apply paints to it. And so these are all painted with oil paints. But the eggs, for instance, are, these are glass, and they're colored glass, right? And you can see the difference, right? And so I like to play with the idea of the story and the dream. And that's more how I look at it, in that the bird is always my narrator of my story, and the elements that are shiny are often the dream elements. So in this piece, gathered as one, the bird has gathered, you know, all these dreams to be part of its nest, part of its home. And so it tells a very small story. And I would say almost all my work tells a very similar story. I'm interested in connection. I'm interested in manifestations, and that includes being sick and being healthy, being alive, being dead, and that aspects of everything that we have on this earth all exist within us too. And so our connections are very, very deep and not always realized in what we're doing or what we're seeing or what we're saying or the materials we're using. But much of my work has other elements in it, like the wall piece here. This is part of a series that I did, which was all about discovery, and I was imagining what it would have been like to be on a ship and come to the new world, and how things were recorded, how people would draw and illustrate new plants that they had seen, and then later sculptures would be created from this, and stories would be told. And so this to me was like a ship's log, this discovery log. And other pieces kind of have come out of that. I I like to use the titles, and for instance, a lot of my work will use a specific plant, and it will tell a story based upon the plant. Like in Double Bind, which was the cage piece I have here, it's the plant material is, and I can't remember the plant's name, but it's a bean that creates a binder that's actually used in oil paints. And the binder, really the idea of something that binds, right? And it worked well with the idea of the cage, because many people think of a cage as something that's containing and something that you always want to get out of. But both binding and a cage have similar qualities in that there's a negative aspect to it if it's used to an extreme, but it's also protective. So you want something to bind when you want it to bind, and you want something to be caged when you want it to be protected, right? And so I often use these kind of elements in my titles, in the plants that I choose to elaborate on a concept. Okay, do you have any questions? Okay.
So many questions.
Oh, do you? Good, because I rattled as long about as I can rattle.
It's amazing. Can you speak to technically how you create such forms in such scale, this glass being breakable? How you can, if you can speak to that, just the
Right.
technical aspect.
Sure. I get a lot of technical questions, I think because people are less familiar with this technique. So the technique that I use, I was trained as a glass blower, okay, where you gather glass out of a furnace and you're blowing that on a long pipe. But this technique is called lamp working or flame working. And so you're working with a torch, and there's many different types of torches. There's torches that sit on a bench, right, that you use, and you're rotating the glass in front of the flame. Then there's torches that you can also use where the glass is not being held, and you're holding the torch itself, and you're applying it to the glass. So for some of these, I've used both those techniques, where I have, like when I created the nest. So everything that you see that I've made, it's all made separately, and then it's joined together over a series of annealings. Okay, so annealing is the technique where you've got a hot piece of glass, you have a hot kiln or oven, whatever you want to call it, and you put the glass in, and then you bring it up to a temperature which takes the stress out of the glass, and then it lowers to room temperature slowly over time. And depending on the type of glass and the thickness, all of that creates the amount of time and the temperature that you have to anneal work. So this work, like in this piece, I built the nest over a series of days, where I started kind of on the inside small, and then at the end of the time when I got sick of working on it, because after a while you're holding it and you need to do something else, otherwise you won't be able to do this for 40 years like I've done. So you stick it in the annealer, and then I bring it up to temperature, and this glass is borosilicate glass. It's laboratory glass. Pyrex is a brand name of borosilicate. And it anneals at 1060 degrees. So this glass was created to withstand thermal shock. That's why you can stick a votive candle in here, let it melt all the way down. You could burn against the sides. You could get it out by pouring boiling water over this, and it won't break the glass, because this is thin, even thin glass, and it was created to be able to put over a Bunsen burner, right, like a laboratory or pressurized in some sort of experiment. And it's also impervious to acid, so it can't be acid etched, or it's very difficult for it to be etched by acid. So I can then take this back out of an annealer at room temperature and then just start working on it again. And the glass below it usually won't crack. And if it does crack, I can seal the crack up with a torch. Okay, so that's how I created this, but then when I put all these pieces together, so all these pieces were made in front of a torch flame. And then the pieces came together, and so with these larger elements, those I put together so they were all cool. Right? I made them, I made the shapes, I tapered the rods and whatnot, and then it went into the annealer, went up to temperature, came back down, and was cooled. And then I took them out, and I had the base piece, which was already annealed. I made it, and it was annealed. And then this big, thick ball. Now this is where it gets really technical, because when you have thick elements, they do need to be hot when you put them all together. So this was hot, and then I applied the 2 arms to that without these leaves or anything on it. And then I put a little ball off the top of the big ball, and then all of that got annealed. And then when it came out, I was able to connect these pieces to the nest, and then I married them both together, and then I eyeballed and tried to create a symmetrical shape. And then at the end, I put the bird on. That was probably the last piece that I did. So, it's like building a house, right? Do you start with the roof? No, you don't start with the roof. You start with the foundation and then the framework, and then you add detail on top of that. And it's the same thing with glass, it's the same thing with clay, it's the same thing with metal. You start with the framework and then you build on that. Like my really big piece in the front, it was made by creating a full-size sketch, and I always start with a sketch. And I try to do it to scale, because then a sketch can become a map, and I can actually bend rods to the map. And so that gave me ideas of proportion, and I was working with an annealer at the time. So the annealer, everything has to be annealed, everything has to be slowly cooled, and the annealer size is you can't make something that's larger, right? It's not going to fit. So I would draw and measure everything out to make sure it was going to fit in my annealer. And then I started to realize, well, I could make things bigger if they stacked on each other. And so I started working with the cage idea, where I had an internal element, and then I could make an external element, and it was elevated, everything got elevated, and then other parts could go on. Things that you couldn't necessarily do hot, I could put them together cold, and it wouldn't really be an issue. So it's great. Hello. And so it's the same with the larger work. I made an internal metal kind of scaffolding for it to hold, right? And then I could slip the sections on to create a larger work. And so I made the basic sections and then stacked them, and then they got embellished. So it was all done. It's very much a construction. Yeah.
And how do you actually embellish those leaves, for example? I mean, do you carve them when they're hot, or what?
The leaves?
Yeah.
The leaves are all done a little different. These are thick, which I really like, but like these, so, break anything. So I knew I wanted these to rest on the table. So this is thicker. These are actually made out of tubing that I cut open and then I shape. And if I want them to be similar, I make one and then I match the second to the other. So I knew I wanted these to be slightly, to get smaller as I went up. And so I will take a tube. So these are all blown. So I'll take a tube and taper it so that it gets a little skinnier at both ends, like a leaf would generally. And then I'll flatten it. And then I'll puff one side a little bit so I get a little bit of a contour for the back, right? The spine of the leaf, because it's going to be slightly concave. And then I'll take a pair of shears and cut down it, and then open that up, and then shape it and give it definition with a tool. That's how that one's done. This was very different. You know, because these are, this leaf is very thick, and like a cardoon or an artichoke or like a piece of celery, it's the stem of it's concave. So I took some really thick rod, 1-inch rod that I have, and I condensed it down and I made a fat cylinder, flattened it, made it concave, and then pulled it back out into a rod. And so I did that for each of these two pieces, and then I built the smaller stems like a thistle has, right? And then that got annealed. So I did that whole process. This was a day's work, one leaf. And then similarly with the stem, because the stems have a contour to them, I made a kind of a wider piece, wider cylinder, cut in hot, when it was still hot, with a tool, and then pulled it long. And when you do that, you can do that in glass. That's how they make Marini. That's how they pull taffy with an image inside of it. It's all done big, and then it pulls, when it's heated evenly and you stretch it, you get the same contours or image inside the piece. And so then I pulled the stems, and the flowers are all blown. And then I just slowly put it together over a couple of days. Because this has parts that go in and out, it's more fragile. You know, it could, when I apply a torch to it, it could shock that area, and the shock could go down a line. So I did each one of the leaves that I put on, it got annealed after I put one on, and then it went back in the oven and got annealed. And I can do up to, if I'm working like a 10 or 12 hour day, I can do 3 annealings in a day. So. Does that answer your question? Did it make more questions? The pieces can take everyone always says, how long does it take to make this? Really depends like how many I'm working on and which piece it is. And I think probably the longest I've spent on a piece was 2 months. And that was a very large figure that I made. And it depends how close the deadline is. An element. Yeah. That it?
No more questions? Thank you so much.
I want
want to talk about is I get distracted really easily. So if you can ask me questions at the end, I would really appreciate that. So I want to thank Cambridge Arts and Crafts and Keke for inviting me to do this show. Unlike Keke and Janis, I don't work with glass. I work with polymer clay. And I first came across the material in 1986 when I was visiting my family in Hong Kong. My sisters were playing with the material and I wanted to try it out, and 36 years later, I'm still working with it. So at that time I had graduated in printmaking, but I had sold my printing press for plane tickets. So I wanted to find a material that didn't require a big expenditure in terms of equipment. And polymer clay really worked well for me. So I started looking around back in the States for the material in bead stores and craft stores, and saw Lois Dubin's The History of Beads. So this is a new edition of it. But Dan and I quickly became obsessed with beads. And to fund our collection, we started making beads and jewelry. And Dan in 1990 switched to making glass. So our jewelry from then on is a combination of glass and polymer beads. And we call them sampler necklaces because of that, kind of two materials, but also because sometimes we, especially for the larger sampler necklaces, which I'm standing and blocking the view of, it contains beads from our collection as well. So it could be ceramic or stone or any other material. But it also contains beads done with different techniques, like carving or cane work or mosaic work. Another thing I want to say is that in the new edition of History of Beads, Lois actually included our beads in it, and also a sampler necklace. So I'm very happy about it. There are 3 samplers in the show, and I think they're all in this case. Another book I want to point out is that's very important to me is this book on buttons by Diana Epstein and Millicent Safro. And the reason is because that was where I first came upon micromosaic work, Italian glass micromosaics. And it's these beetles in there. That's amazing. I think beetles first. So it's this one that just inspired me. And that was, I saw this book in 1992, and the same year we went to a show in Santa Fe. We got married that year, but our big thing is to go to this bead conference with my whole family. But we saw Huicho Indian seed bead work, and together with the glass micromosaic and the Huicho work, that's when I started thinking how I can do micromosaics in glass, in polymer. So it took me a few months to develop the technique, and it hasn't really changed that much over the years. So the first box I want to pass around actually has the material I use to make my mosaic jewelry. So there's a block of polymer clay in there. It actually comes in many different brands. I happen to use Fimo Soft. The other thing I use is a bezel that I set mosaics in. And I usually set it in sterling. And then the equipment is very simple. I have a fine tip tweezer and razor blade. And pretty much that's it. My second thing people ask me is how do I make those mosaic bits? So I mix colors, very small quantity of the polymer clay, and then I hand pull them in threads, kind of like if I'm working with glass, it's like pulling stringers, except you use your fingers. And then bake that, and then chop it up into little bits. And then I have the box that has the baked threads, the little bits, and then a mosaic in progress. I think I started it a couple days ago, and then a finished piece. The finished mosaic is baked at only 230, 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And then when it's cool, I coat it with a matte lacquer. And that's it. Most of what I do is jewelry. And besides Dan, I also collaborate with other metalsmiths. Chuck Domitrovich, Nancy Bonema, and Juan Reyes, and Dana Casara, and Virginia Causey. So I invited each of them to collaborate on a piece for this show. And they are all jewelry artists, teachers, and friends. And some of them I've worked with numerous times, and some of them very, very rarely. But they have all helped me and inspired me over the years. They're not here, but they will visit during the show. So I'm going to talk about some of the pieces. And the first one is with Dan in this, oh, I've forgotten one thing I want to mention since we have all these glass artists here. Even though most of the glass beads in my pieces are done by Dan, I do have one, not little, but one big glass bead I made, and it's in this necklace. It's the rectangular one. It's done with glass enamels, the same process that Keke was explaining. So, but I stopped doing in glass because of eye concerns. So, but anyway, back to the pieces. So this one, this wood box is called Between Sea and Sand, and it's about beach ford. So it's a very romantic name. But beach ford is in Kalaylock, and we love the driftwood, the tide pools, and the little polished pebbles on the beach. So on the one side of the box is a micro mosaic of the driftwood, and on the other side is carved sea anemone. In the scrapbook itself has many images we took of the beach over, I don't know, years of traveling there. The other piece, which must be in that case, yeah, is a St. Christopher box. That one, well, St. Christopher is the patron saint of travelers, so I wanted to do a sewing kit. So there's a sewing kit inside the locket that has a pair of scissors that's functional. I didn't make the scissors. And then there's a thread, black and white. There's a pin cushion and pin and a needle. So as I was researching St. Christopher, I saw a lot of pictures of him with the head of a dog. And it's like, you know, why? And I found three explanations. One was that he's faithful. The second was that the Egyptians have their god of the underworld, Anubis, with the dog head. So maybe the Christians wanted a version of a dog-headed saint. So the third one is St. Christopher is a Canaanite. And maybe got confused. I don't know. So yeah, take your pick. So that piece is done with Nancy Bonema. There's two bugs, one with I don't know. Oh, here. That the bigger beetle is done with Dana Casara, And the pattern of the beetle, I was inspired by Indonesian fabric called Zumba. That's why the name of the bug has Zumba in it, or my bug has. The other tiny bug is in that case is by Virginia Causey, and it has gold little opals and also a freshwater pearl in it. I like working with figurative images and creatures and humans. So in also in that case is a big ring done with Juan Reyes, and also I think in that same case is Chuck's piece, and that one is in deep waters, so it's a brooch. And also this big sampler necklace is pretty figurative. And the wall pieces, the mosaic wall pieces, the outing and the gator, and also 2 scratchboard drawings. One is there, and then the other one is gone. But I used to draw a lot, especially when I was little. But the more I did jewelry, the less I did drawing. And it was not until when I started having eye trouble that I was worried I couldn't do micromosaics anymore. And I started doing drawing again. So I've been drawing many years, and my current favorite form of drawing is scratchboard. That's probably reminds me of carving the wood blocks and also making the etching plates. So there are, I do work non-figuratively. So like in this case, there's the 2 Rolodex bracelets. They're out of vinyl. And this is, we got it from Boeing surplus many years ago. And I just can't find it. I have no idea what it's for. And this is all I have left. And then the other is out of polypropylene. And it's a plastic, clear plastic sheet somewhere. Oh. So, and Dan had these extra things from his lab, these folders, and that's what that bracelet is made of. Clear and this kind of, I don't know, semi-clear one. So the other Rolodex bracelet is out of polymer clay, and it has photo transfers of seashells. The last piece I want to talk about is that piece over there with a lot of writing. So I made that in 2019. It was during President Trump's administration. I was feeling very sad, very frustrated and angry. I've been in this country since 1975, and for the first time I felt unwelcome. And I felt unwelcome because I was Chinese and I was an immigrant. So I wanted to do a piece where I hand-carved the names of other immigrants, their occupation or contribution, and also the places they came from. And I also included photo transfers of my naturalization certificate. So you can actually see it on there. And so I'm very happy to be able to share this piece in the show. So thank you very much. So any questions or?
I just have a comment. The other day I came across a YouTube of you showing your technique, rolling how you stretch it out. If any of you are interested, it's fascinating to see how she works and gets the femo just.
And it's not as easy as you would think. It is. I took her class and I did one of those. And I was like, that's the last one of those I've ever made.
Right.
I'm like, done.
And Sarah Wilbanks is a great jeweler, And when I was asking about doing translucent polymer, Sarah suggested this different brand, Primo, that she works with a lot, and that's what is used on that. But the rest are the Fimo Soft. So.
We have that.
Who's that?
I was just gonna say that video is available on the Bainbridge Arts and Crafts YouTube channel if you want to take a look.
Yeah, and that was the first videotape Dan and did, my husband and Dan did of me trying to do a demo, so I was happy it worked out.
I love the Rolodex bracelets.
Oh.
To me, they very much take on a creature quality.
Oh, I'll pass around this one too.
Yeah.
This one?
Do you harden? Because you were taking the tape roll out and it looks softer than what I imagine those are. Are they soft or are they hardened somehow?
The sheets are actually run through a pasta machine and then baked. And when it's thin like that, it's flexible, unlike a bead when it's solid.
Yeah.
But this one, I made sheets all vertical stripes, and then baked it, and then hand cut each piece, and all those are hand cut.
Yeah.
And then that one is crazy because I looked on the edge. I had to kind of arrange them to get that E-cut pattern on the sides of the piece. So, but yeah, and yeah, it actually says in there I do a lot of thin sheet work. But yeah, there was a period of time I did a lot of thin sheet pieces.
And the necklace is also done in the same technique in your hand.
Oh,
cutting
that-
all the
that one?
letters. Yeah.
That one
It's
is
a beautiful, beautiful piece.
that one. Let's see. There's a few different ways I did the sheets. Some of them I roll out the sheet of the Primo, and then I sandwich the silver foil in between, and then roll it through the pasta machine again.
Yeah.
And then before I baked it, I hand carved the names or the lettering,
Yeah.
and then baked it.
Which is hard to do, by the way.
Yes, it's very hard.
It's really hard to work like that with raw clay.
Yeah, it's easy
Yeah.
to break.
Break it.
Yeah, but the good thing about it is if it breaks, I can put a little bit of clay back in there and repair it and then bake it. So, and then some of the other sheets are done where I take bits of the foil and mix it with the Primo, and then roll that out and then cut the sheets. So, yeah, I think basically, that's what I remember. So, but you can also just do foil on the surface and then bake it too.
Okay.
Yeah, but I didn't want it that shiny.
Yeah. No, I love the subtlety.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
Cynthia, could I ask if those boxes to be sent down?
Oh,
Oh, I thought you all had them already. Oh, I'm sorry.
so I'll just open and pass. That'll be easier. Oh, thanks.
Cynthia, can you tell us how you developed your imagery? Your style?
Most of them, I don't do any drawings ahead of time. I would, after I have the clay, the polymer clay rolled out or set in the bezel, then I use a sewing pin and lightly scratch the design on it. The imagery depends on the show I'm in. So like in the old days with Cherry, they had theme shows. So I would do it around the theme, and it usually helps a lot. For this show, initially, I was going to do all kind of book theme, but then that, I don't know, disappeared halfway through. And the only time where I have a detailed image is when I do portraits. When someone sends me a picture of someone they want to do, then I have to do it very realistically, and that's when I have an image in front of me. But normally I just scratch on the clay. The technique is tedious enough. So if I have to follow something, it's no fun. So I don't do a lot of commissions, that kind of commissions. Yeah.
Can you talk about the necklace behind you?
The next, oops. The big one or the?
With the big balls on them
Oh yes. This one.
behind it, yeah.
Yeah. That one is. Let's see. That one I wanted to do kind of birds, some chickens in that one, and the glass beads are either by Dan or this one is actually I think a lucite bead is not glass. The round bead is by who is it? I can't remember. It's a bead from our collection, and we have only one left of his beads. And I think someone said that he's no longer making beads. But the rest are Dan's beads. Some of the beads are like it's a tile mosaic, and then there's mosaic and cane work and carved. And on the reverse side, it's might be different techniques like mokumegane or carving. But
So you carved them.
I carved, yeah. And there's another hollow tube mosaic. So yeah, some I've forgotten what's on the back side. So, but yeah.
And are you using a
Magnifying. I try not to, because usually with the magnifier I can only see parts, and I like to see the whole piece when I'm working. So what I do instead is, before I didn't need a magnifier, it's only these last few years. So now I take a photo of the piece when I'm almost done, and then I enlarge it, thank you cell phones. So, and then I would, if there's pieces that's not, flat or I miss an area, that's what I do now. And then I bake it.
Oh.
So is there, as you put it in the bezel, is there something that anchors it? Do you have a material in there that's
Yes, yeah. So the first thing I do, I have the bezel, it has to be all finished because it can't be heated again, unless you do laser kind of work. So, so I have this metal bezel, and then I take unbaked clay. In the old days it was scalpy, now it's Fimo soft. And I put it in the bottom and flatten it, and then I take the sewing pin and do my sketch on the clay itself, and then I start doing mosaic work. And when the whole piece is done the way I want it, then it's fired. So everything gets baked.
So fired, but in the bezel or not in the bezel?
In the bezel, yeah. So the bezel has to be able to withstand the heat, and most material does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you would test it first if you're unsure.
How on earth did you do the pattern on that?
Yeah, we arrange it. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
And is it attached? I mean, is there a connection somewhere?
Oh, it's a spring, elastic spring. So women are good. Women slip it on. Guys do like that, and then they put it on, and then that stretches it out and ruins it. And one who did the ring has ruined so many of my Rolodexes when he visits the house. So, but then it comes at a 7-inch length, and you screw it together. I put a dab of watchmaker's glue in it, and it's screwed.
So there's a connection somewhere.
Yeah, it's like a male-female part. Yeah,
This is amazing.
Rio Grande and rings and things. So,
Have you all seen the? Yeah.
so
Anybody else?
thank you very much.
Be sure not to miss Illuminations, featuring 3 amazing artists, Keke Janis Miltenberger, and Cynthia Toops at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts from August 6th through August 29th.